Every society has kept codes of law for people since the beginning of time. It has punished or detained members of that society for breaking those laws. But over the past few decades, we've seen an alarming trend in the United States: the private prison industry. Every year, it makes over $1 billion in profits. Private prisons are money-making machines with no ethics whatsoever. So why our nation's prison system is a major fail on every level? Well, whatever purpose you think it's serving, it's definitely not. For me, fortunately, my experiences has been limited to NPR podcasts and a few documentaries, so I needed to dig deeper into the subject to get to the dirty nitty-gritty. I found some very disturbing things, but we're only going to go over a few of them today. And we're going to start with talking about when the private prison industry started, and that's going to be the war on drugs and Reagan's mission. Number two, we're going to go over who owns these private prisons and what is the cost. And number three, we're going to talk about what direction the United States is moving in at this time to abolish private prisons for good. So the first thing we're going to start with is, how did these private prisons start? Well, let's go back to the 80s. Everybody loves the 80s. I know I do. I remember Nancy Reagan and the war on drugs. Just Say No had just come out. It was very trendy, very new. Anybody who did drugs was a loser. Well, this increased to so many arrests and incarcerations during the 80s that the federal and state prisons were literally bursting at the seams. So Reagan, being the corporate guy that he is, welcomed corporate America and said, hey, come help us with our problem, save the taxpayers some money, and you can take the overflow of our prisons, and I can still win the war on drugs. Great. Which brings us to our next point, and that is the CCA and the birth of it, which is the Corrections Corporation of America, and the for-profit prison money began. So the idea behind it was, if it cost $1 to incarcerate one prisoner in a federal prison, in the private facility, it would only cost 50 cents per prisoner. So that seems like a huge savings, right? Well, not so fast. The reason why they're able to do this so cheaply is because they cut out necessary items that are essential to running this type of an organization. They cut things out like highly trained guards or basic cleaning supplies. Even antifungal cream is a huge commodity in there, and it's not offered at all. The prisoners suffer greatly because they are not being taken care of. And even the food that they eat is so substandard that they've even complained of maggots in their food. So it's just an awful, awful mess. But do you know who makes the money? Is the private prisoners. They charge everything. Phone calls, if you want to call your family in a private prison, they subcontract phone companies where they charge you $25 for a 10-minute call. This is outrageous, and it needs to end. It actually costs taxpayers more money in the long run. There's no rehabilitation programs. So the idea is to keep the prisoners inside. Now, you think, well, why are there so many prisoners in there? Well, here's the catch. The contract with the federal government has a clause in there that these private prisons put in there that said, hey, listen, we need you to guarantee a certain quota of people per year. Otherwise, you have to pay us a fine. So no matter what's going on the outside, rehabilitation program, any kind of drug rehab or therapy, it doesn't matter, because they need to keep those prisoners in there or they'll pay a hefty fine. In 2015, Arizona prison was short on their quota and were fined $3 million. That's crazy. And a study done in 2016 at the University of Wisconsin shows that the private prison dole out twice as many citations as federal prisons. Why? Because when you get citations, it lengthens your sentence, thus keeps you inside, because they make more money. So after hearing all of this, let's think about how America is moving into the direction of abolishing these private prisons for good. Private prisons are money-making machines with no ethics whatsoever. Thankfully, this year in January, President Biden announced that he will be abolishing the privately run prisons and no longer offering contracts. Now, that means that they will be phasing out those prisons by 2028. They will no longer be offering contracts. That's not to say that the private prisons can't get money from somewhere else and try to run them. But let me just leave you with this. The war on drugs has caused a huge increase in prisoners, which we can't keep up with. The for-profits are not working and are actually hurting our society rather than helping us. We end the contracts, but let me tell you, although these companies are more likely to be able to obtain money from banks across the ocean, China, Americans are more aware than ever. All eyes are on everything. They're involved in social justice and social change more than anything ever in our lives I've ever seen. And they may be able to get the money, but we still hold the power, and culture can cancel anything if we really want to. Thank you for listening.